The Garden of Stillness, in a remote valley where morning mist danced between ancient pine trees, there lived a young monk named Kenji, who carried within his heart a restlessness that no amount of meditation seemed to quiet. Each dawn found him in the temple garden sweeping the same stone paths his predecessors had swept for centuries, yet his mind remained as scattered as autumn leaves in a windstorm. The garden itself was a masterpiece of simplicity. Smooth river stones formed gentle curves around islands of moss, so green they seemed to glow with inner light. A single cherry tree stood at the center, its branches reaching toward the sky like arms in prayer. Beneath its shade sat a weathered stone bench where the temple's eldest master, Roshi Takeshi, would often be found in the early hours before sunrise. Kenji had observed this master for months, watching how the old man would sit perfectly still, his breathing so gentle it barely disturbed the morning air. Sometimes a butterfly would land on Roshi Takeshi's shoulder and remain there for what seemed like hours, as if recognizing a kindred spirit in the realm of perfect peace. The young monk longed to understand this quality of stillness, this ability to become one with the natural world around him. One particular morning, as cherry blossoms began their gentle descent, like nature's own meditation on impermanence, Kenji approached his master with a question that had been burning in his heart for weeks. The old monk's eyes remained closed, yet somehow he sensed the young man's presence and gestured for him to sit beside him on the ancient bench. "Master," Kenji began, his voice barely above a whisper, so as not to disturb the sacred silence of dawn. "I have been practicing meditation for 3 years, yet my mind remains like a monkey jumping from branch to branch. I watch you sit in perfect stillness, and I wonder if I will ever find such peace. What is the secret to quieting the endless chatter of thoughts?" Roshi Takeshi opened his eyes slowly, as if emerging from the depths of an ocean of tranquility. His gaze fell upon a small spider that had begun weaving its web between 2 branches of a nearby bamboo plant. The morning dew caught the early sunlight, transforming each strand of silk into a thread of liquid diamond. "Tell me, young Kenji," the master said, his voice carrying the gentle authority of someone who had spent decades in communion with silence. "When you watch this spider weave its web, do you see struggle or do you see natural expression?" Kenji observed the tiny creature as it moved with purposeful grace, each movement flowing into the next without hesitation or doubt. "I see natural expression, master. The spider does not fight against its nature but simply follows what it knows to do. And yet," Roshi Takeshi continued, "if we were to examine the spider's mind, if such a thing were possible, would we find the same restless thoughts that plague you? Would we discover worries about whether the web will be strong enough, whether the morning wind might destroy its work, whether it is weaving correctly according to some imagined standard?" The question hung in the air like incense, filling the space between them with contemplation. Kenji watched as the spider continued its work, seemingly oblivious to their conversation, lost in the pure act of creation without self-consciousness or doubt. "No, master," Kenji replied after a long moment. "The spider simply weaves because weaving is its nature. It does not question or judge its actions." "Precisely." The old monk nodded, a gentle smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "The spider has never learned to separate itself from its actions, never learned to create a commentary about its experience. It exists in what we might call a state of natural meditation where doing and being are one seamless reality. As if summoned by their conversation, a gentle breeze stirred the garden, causing the bamboo to sway and the spider's web to shimmer like a mandala made of light. The cherry blossoms continued their slow dance earthward, each petal following the ancient choreography of letting go. But Master Kenji pressed. Surely there must be some technique, some method to achieve this state of natural being. I have tried counting breaths, focusing on mantras, visualizing peaceful scenes, yet still my mind races like a river in flood. Roshi Takeshi stood slowly, his movements carrying the fluid grace of someone who had learned to move in harmony with the rhythms of his own body. He walked to the cherry tree and placed his weathered hand against its trunk, feeling the slow pulse of sap rising from root to branch. "Come," he said, beckoning Kenji to join him beneath the tree's canopy. "Place your hand here next to mine and tell me what you feel." Kenji pressed his palm against the smooth bark, feeling its coolness against his skin. At first, he felt nothing but the texture of the tree's surface. But as he stood in stillness, other sensations began to emerge. There was a subtle vibration, almost imperceptible, like the tree's own heartbeat. There was warmth beneath the coolness, the life force that had sustained this tree through countless seasons of growth and rest. "I feel aliveness," Kenji said, wonder creeping into his voice, "as if the tree is breathing, though not with lungs like ours." "Yes," the master confirmed, "and in this moment, as you feel the tree's life force, where are your restless thoughts? Where is the monkey mind that jumps from worry to worry?" Kenji realized with surprise that his mind had indeed grown quiet. In focusing on the subtle sensations beneath his palm, the endless stream of mental commentary had naturally subsided like a river finding its way to a peaceful lake. "They are gone," he whispered, almost afraid that speaking might break the spell of tranquility that had settled over him. "Not gone," Roshi Takeshi corrected gently. "Simply not the focus of your attention. Your thoughts are like clouds passing through the sky of your awareness. When you become fascinated by each cloud, you forget the vast blue expanse that contains them all. But when you rest your attention in the sky itself, the clouds continue their journey without disturbing your essential peace." They stood together in comfortable silence, two human beings connected to the ancient wisdom of a tree that had witnessed countless dawns and seasons. Above them, birds began their morning songs, each note falling into the garden's symphony of awakening life. "The secret you seek," the master continued, "is not a technique to be mastered, but a recognition of what has always been present. Your true nature is like this garden's stillness, always here, always peaceful, always complete. The restless thoughts are like visitors who come and go, but they are not who you are." As the morning sun climbed higher, painting the garden in shades of gold and green, Kenji felt something shift within him. It was not a dramatic transformation, but rather a gentle recognition, like suddenly seeing a familiar face in a crowd. The peace he had been seeking was not something to be achieved, but something to be uncovered, like brushing dust from a mirror to reveal its natural clarity. "Master," he said, his voice filled with quiet gratitude, "I think I am beginning to understand. The stillness was never absent. I was simply looking for it in the wrong place." Roshi Takeshi nodded, his eyes twinkling with the joy of a teacher whose student has glimpsed their own true nature. "And now, young Kenji, your real practice begins. not the practice of trying to become peaceful, but the practice of remembering that peace is your birthright, as natural to you as weaving is to the spider or growing is to this tree. As they walked back toward the temple, their footsteps soft on the moss-covered stones, Kenji felt as if he was seeing the garden for the first time. Each element, the carefully raked gravel, the precisely placed rocks, the gentle curve of the walking path, seemed to whisper the same teaching that beauty emerges not from complexity, but from simplicity, not from effort, but from allowing, not from grasping, but from letting go. The morning meditation bell began to ring, its clear tone spreading across the valley like ripples on a still pond. Other monks emerged from their quarters, moving with the unhurried grace of those who have learned to find the sacred in the ordinary. Kenji joined them, but now his steps carried a different quality. Not the eager rushing of someone seeking something outside themselves, but the natural rhythm of someone who has remembered that they are already home, the merchant of forgotten dreams. In the same valley where Kenji had discovered his first glimpse of inner stillness, there existed a peculiar marketplace that appeared only when the moon was dark and the mist hung thick between the mountains. The locals whispered of a merchant who sold not goods made of wood or metal, but dreams that had been forgotten by their dreamers, memories that had slipped through the cracks of consciousness, and moments of peace that people had experienced but failed to recognize. This merchant was known simply as Yum, though whether this was his true name or merely what the wind called him, no one could say. His stall appeared to be constructed from crystallized moonbeams and shadows woven into fabric, creating a structure that seemed to exist in the space between reality and imagination. Those who encountered him described his appearance differently each time. Sometimes he appeared as an ancient man with eyes like deep pools of starlight. Other times, as a young woman whose hair flowed like liquid silver, and occasionally as a child whose laughter contained the wisdom of ages. On this particular night, 3 travelers found themselves drawn to Yume's mysterious stall, each carrying within their hearts a different form of restlessness that prevented them from finding the deep peace they sought. The first was Akira, a successful businessman whose mind never ceased its calculations and planning even in sleep. The second was May, an artist who had lost her ability to create, her imagination clouded by doubt and comparison. The third was Hiroshi, an elderly man who carried the weight of regrets from choices made and unmade throughout his long life. As they approached the stall, the very air seemed to shimmer with possibility. Yum's merchandise was unlike anything they had ever seen. Glass orbs containing swirling mists of color that moved with their own mysterious purpose. Silk scarves that seemed to be woven from the essence of twilight itself, and small wooden boxes that hummed with an energy that made their hearts resonate in harmony. "Welcome, travelers of the restless night." Yum spoke, his voice carrying the quality of wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "I see that each of you carries a burden that prevents you from accessing the natural peace that is your birthright. Tell me, what is it that you seek in the depths of your being?" Akira stepped forward first, his expensive suit somehow looking out of place in this realm between worlds. "I seek the ability to quiet my mind," he said, his voice carrying the tension of someone who had forgotten how to truly relax. "Even when I close my eyes, I see spreadsheets and profit margins, deadlines and meetings. I have achieved everything I thought I wanted, yet sleep eludes me like a butterfly I cannot catch." Yumi nodded knowingly and reached for one of the glass orbs, this one containing what appeared to be a slowly rotating galaxy of deep blue and silver light. "This," he said, cradling the orb gently in his palms, "contains the dream of a child who once lay in a field of grass watching clouds transform into dragons and castles. The child grew up to become a banker, and in his pursuit of success, he forgot the profound peace he once found in simply observing the sky's endless theater." As Akira held the orb, warmth spread through his hands and up his arms. Suddenly, he could remember lying in his grandmother's garden as a boy, the smell of jasmine in the evening air, the way the stars seemed close enough to pluck like fruit from a celestial tree. In that memory, his mind had been completely still, absorbed in wonder rather than worry. "But how do I return to that state?" Akira asked, his voice softer, now touched by the innocence he had rediscovered. "You do not return," Yum replied with a gentle smile. "You recognize that the capacity for such wonder never left you. It simply became buried beneath layers of learned complexity. The child who marveled at clouds still lives within you, waiting to be acknowledged." May approached next, her artist's eyes drawn to the silk scarves that seemed to capture and reflect light in impossible ways. "I once created beauty," she said, her voice heavy with loss. "My paintings used to flow from some deep well within me, but that well has run dry. I sit before blank canvases now, paralyzed by the fear that I have nothing left to offer the world." Yume selected a scarf that shimmered with colors that had no names, hues that existed in the space between purple and gold, between green and silver. "This," he said, draping it gently around May's shoulders, "was woven from the essence of a moment when a young girl discovered that she could make marks on paper that captured the feeling of rain on leaves. She had no training, no knowledge of technique, only the pure joy of expressing what moved her heart." As the scarf settled around her, May felt a familiar stirring within her chest, the same excitement she had felt as a child when she first discovered that colors could dance together on paper, that lines could capture the essence of movement and emotion. She remembered the hours she had spent drawing simply because it felt as natural as breathing, with no thought of success or failure, only the pure pleasure of creation. "The well has not run dry," Yum explained, his form seeming to shift and flow like the scarves he sold. "It has simply been covered by the debris of expectation and comparison. Creativity is not something you possess, but something you are. When you remove the obstacles of judgment and fear, it flows as naturally as water finding its way to the sea." Finally, Hiroshi stepped forward, his aged hands trembling slightly as he reached toward one of the wooden boxes. "I carry the weight of a lifetime's mistakes," he said, his voice cracked with emotion. "Opportunities, missed words, unspoken love, unexpressed. How can I find peace when my heart is heavy with regret?" Yume's eyes filled with infinite compassion as he selected a box made from wood so ancient it seemed to contain the wisdom of forests that had grown and died before human memory began. "This box," he said, placing it gently in Hiroshi's weathered hands, "contains the understanding that a monk discovered after 40 years of meditation. That regret is simply love that has not yet found its proper expression." As Hiroshi opened the box, a soft light emerged, and with it came a profound realization. He saw that every mistake he had made, every opportunity missed, had been part of a larger pattern of learning and growth. The love he had failed to express to his departed wife was not lost, but had transformed into a deeper appreciation for the preciousness of every moment. The chances he had not taken had led him to other experiences that had shaped him in ways he was only now beginning to understand. Regret, Hume continued, is the shadow cast by wisdom. It appears when we judge our past selves by our present understanding, forgetting that growth requires the very experiences we now wish we could change. The peace you seek comes not from having lived a perfect life, but from accepting the perfect imperfection of the life you have lived. As the three travelers stood in the ethereal light of Hume's stall, each holding their respective treasures, they began to understand that what they had purchased was not really contained in the objects themselves, but had been awakened within their own hearts. The orb, the scarf, and the box were merely keys that had unlocked doors to rooms within themselves that had always existed but had been forgotten. Remember, Hume said, his voice beginning to fade as the first light of dawn touched the mountain peaks. What you have rediscovered tonight was never truly lost. The peace you seek, the creativity you mourn, the forgiveness you need. These are not commodities to be acquired, but aspects of your true nature to be remembered. When you return to your daily lives, carry with you the understanding that every moment offers the opportunity to reconnect with these essential qualities of your being. As the morning mist began to lift and the mysterious marketplace started to fade like a dream upon waking, the three travelers found themselves standing in an ordinary field. Yet each carried within them an extraordinary transformation. They had learned that the deepest peace comes not from changing their circumstances, but from changing their relationship to their circumstances, not from acquiring something new, but from recognizing what had always been present. Akira returned to his business world, but now he carried within him the memory of cloud watching, and in quiet moments between meetings, he would allow his mind to rest in that same quality of open awareness. May picked up her brushes again, but now she painted not to prove her worth, but to express the joy that bubbled up naturally from within her like a spring that had been cleared of debris. Hiroshi spent his remaining years sharing stories with his grandchildren, each tale a gift of wisdom wrapped in the understanding that every experience, even the painful ones, had contributed to the richness of his life's tapestry. And sometimes, on nights when the moon was dark and the mist hung thick between the mountains, other restless souls would find their way to Hume's stall, drawn by the same mysterious force that calls all beings toward the recognition of their own inherent peace and wholeness. The library of unspoken words deep beneath the temple, where Kenji had learned his first lessons in stillness, and far from the mystical marketplace where Yume traded in forgotten dreams, there existed a library that few had ever seen, and fewer still remembered visiting. This was the Library of Unspoken Words, a vast underground chamber where every word that had ever been thought but never spoken, every poem that had lived only in the heart, every declaration of love that had died on trembling lips found their eternal home. The librarian of this extraordinary place was a being known as Kotoba, whose existence straddled the boundary between the world of form and the realm of pure meaning. Some said Kotoba had once been human, a poet perhaps, or a monk who had taken a vow of silence so profound that he had eventually merged with the very essence of unexpressed communication. Others believed Kotoba had always existed, born from the first moment a conscious being had felt something too deep for words and chosen to hold it in sacred silence. The library itself defied all conventional understanding of space and architecture. Its shelves stretched infinitely upward and outward, constructed not from wood or stone, but from crystallized intention and solidified meaning. The books that lined these impossible shelves were not made of paper and ink, but of compressed emotion and distilled thought, each volume glowing with its own inner light that pulsed in rhythm with the heartbeat of its original thinker. On this particular evening, as the boundary between day and night grew thin and permeable, 4 seekers found themselves drawn down a spiral staircase that had appeared behind a seemingly ordinary door in the temple's meditation hall. They descended through layers of earth and time, past roots of ancient trees and veins of precious metals, until they emerged into the vast, luminous space of the library. The first seeker was Yuki, a young mother whose days were filled with the constant chatter of caring for others, yet who carried within her heart profound thoughts about the nature of existence that she had never found the courage to voice. The second was Taro, a farmer whose hands knew the language of soil and seasons, but whose mind held philosophical insights that he believed were too simple for the educated world to value. The third was Sachiko, an elderly tea ceremony master who had spent decades perfecting the art of graceful silence, but who harbored within her soul a vast ocean of unexpressed poetry. The fourth was Kenzo, a young man who had been born mute, but whose inner voice sang with such clarity and beauty that it could move mountains if only it could be heard. As they entered the library, Kotoba appeared before them like a figure emerging from morning mist. His form seemed to shift between solid and translucent, and when he spoke, his words carried the weight of every silence that had ever held meaning. "Welcome, carriers of the unspoken," Kotoba said, his voice resonating not just in their ears, but in the very depths of their beings. "You have been drawn here because each of you holds within your heart words that yearn for expression, thoughts that seek their proper form, truths that have been waiting patiently for their moment of release." Yuki stepped forward first, her eyes wide with wonder as she gazed upon the impossible architecture surrounding them. "I don't understand," she said softly. "I'm just a mother. I spend my days changing diapers and preparing meals. What could I possibly have to offer a place like this?" Kotoba smiled, and as he did, a section of the library's shelves began to glow more brightly. "Come," he said, leading her to a particular shelf where books of soft pearl-like luminescence waited. "These are the thoughts you have while nursing your child in the quiet hours before dawn, the profound realizations about the nature of love and sacrifice that come to you as you watch your little one sleep." As Yuki reached for one of the glowing volumes, it opened in her hands to reveal not words on a page, but living scenes of her own experiences. She saw herself holding her baby during those sacred 3 a.m. feedings, and suddenly she could perceive the thoughts that had moved through her mind during those moments, deep insights about the interconnectedness of all life, profound understanding about the way love multiplies rather than divides when it is shared, revelations about how caring for another being had opened doorways in her heart she never knew existed. "But these are just thoughts," she whispered, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "I never wrote them down, never shared them with anyone." "And yet," Kotoba replied gently, "they are among the most profound philosophical insights this library contains. The wisdom that emerges from the direct experience of love in action often surpasses the most elaborate theoretical constructs. Your unspoken understanding of how the individual self dissolves into something larger through the act of nurturing another being. This is enlightenment expressed through the most ordinary and extraordinary act of motherhood. Taro approached next, his work-worn hands hesitant to touch the delicate spines of the books that called to him. "I work with dirt and seeds," he said, his voice rough from years of speaking mainly to plants and sky. What wisdom could a simple farmer possess? Kotoba led him to a section where the books seemed to pulse with the rhythm of seasons, their covers the color of rich earth and growing things. "These contain your daily conversations with the land," he explained. "Every morning as you walk your fields, you engage in dialogue with forces far greater than yourself. Your understanding of patience, of working in harmony with natural cycles, of trusting in processes you cannot control. These insights have shaped your soul into a living teaching about surrender and faith." As Taro opened one of these earth-toned volumes, he was amazed to discover that his simple observations about when to plant and when to harvest contained profound metaphors for spiritual growth. His intuitive knowledge about the necessity of fallow periods, about the way seeds must die to their old form in order to become something new, about the patience required to tend something it without forcing its growth. All of this revealed itself as deep wisdom about the nature of transformation and trust. "I never thought of it that way," he murmured, ardor creeping into his weathered features. "I just felt what the land needed." "Precisely." Kotoba nodded. "You have been living in constant communion with the Tao, the natural way of things. Your unspoken understanding of how to work with rather than against the forces of nature contains teachings that could guide humanity back into harmony with the earth." Sachiko moved with the fluid grace of decades spent in the practice of tea ceremony, her eyes drawn to a section where books seemed to be bound in silk and moonlight. "I have spent my life perfecting the art of meaningful silence," she said. "But I have always wondered if my silence was wisdom or simply fear of imperfection." The books that responded to her presence contained not words, but movements, not sentences, but gestures. As she opened one, she experienced again the thousands of tea ceremonies she had performed. But now she could perceive the poetry that had flowed through her movements, the haikus that had been written in the precise angle of her wrist as she poured water, the epic verses that had been composed in the careful placement of each utensil. "Your body has been writing poetry for decades," Kotoba explained, his form seeming to flow like steam rising from a tea kettle. "Every ceremony you have performed has been a meditation on impermanence, on the beauty that emerges when complete attention is given to simple actions. Your silence has not been empty but full, pregnant with meaning that transcends the need for verbal expression." Sachiko felt tears of recognition flowing down her cheeks as she realized that her life's work had indeed been a form of spiritual practice, that her dedication to perfecting the smallest details of the tea ceremony had been a way of honoring the sacred in the everyday. Finally, Kenzo approached his hands, moving in the fluid gestures of sign language as he communicated with Kotoba. Though he could not speak aloud, his inner voice had always been clear and strong, filled with songs and stories that no one else had ever heard. Kotoba's response came not in spoken words, but in a form of direct understanding that bypassed the need for sound. He led Kenzo to a section of the library where the books seemed to vibrate with pure frequency, their pages containing not written language, but crystallized music, visual symphonies, and poems made of light and color. As Kenzo opened these extraordinary volumes, he discovered that his inner voice had been composing continuously throughout his life, Not just songs and poems, but entire philosophical treatises about the nature of communication beyond words. Profound insights about how meaning could be transmitted through presence and intention rather than sound. His silence had not been a limitation, but a doorway into forms of expression that transcended the boundaries of conventional language. His understanding of how to communicate through gesture expression and energetic presence contained teachings about the deepest levels of human connection. Each of you, Kotoba said, addressing all four seekers as they stood surrounded by the glowing evidence of their own unrecognized wisdom, has been living a teaching embodying insights that the world desperately needs. Your unspoken words have not been wasted or lost. They have been gathering here, waiting for the moment when you would be ready to recognize their value. As the four seekers spent time in the library reading the books of their own unexpressed wisdom, they began to understand that their lives had been far richer and more meaningful than they had ever imagined. The thoughts they had dismissed as ordinary, the insights they had assumed were too simple or too personal to matter the wisdom they had gained through direct experience rather than formal study. All of this had been weaving itself into a tapestry of understanding that was uniquely their own. But what do we do with this recognition? Yuki asked, her voice filled with a mixture of wonder and uncertainty. How do we honor these unspoken words, now that we know their value? Kotoba's form began to shimmer as the first light of dawn filtered down through impossible depths to reach the library. You do not need to speak them all, he said. Simply knowing that they exist, recognizing the wisdom you carry, changes how you move through the world. When you honor the depth of your own unspoken understanding, you begin to recognize and honor the same depth in others. This recognition itself becomes a form of expression that needs no words. As the four seekers made their way back up the spiral staircase, each carried within them a transformed understanding of their own worth and wisdom. They had learned that every human life contains profound teachings, that wisdom emerges not only from formal study, but from the honest engagement with whatever circumstances life presents. Yuki returned to her daily routine of caring for her family, but now she moved with the awareness that her mothering was a spiritual practice, her love a form of teaching that was shaping not only her child, but the very fabric of reality. Taro went back to his fields with the understanding that his farming was a form of meditation, his relationship with the land, a source of wisdom that could guide others toward harmony and balance. Sachiko continued her tea ceremonies with even deeper reverence, knowing that each movement was a word in an ongoing poem about presence and beauty. And Kenzo moved through the world with the confidence that his silence was not empty but eloquent, his presence a form of communication that touched hearts in ways that words never could. The library of unspoken words continued to exist beneath the temple, gathering the unuttered wisdom of all who passed through life with open hearts and observant minds, a testament to the truth that every being carries within them teachings that could transform the world. If only they could recognize the profound value of their own unexpressed understanding. In a quiet village nestled between misty mountains and winding rivers, there lived an old lantern maker named Sora. His workshop was a humble space at the edge of the village where willow branches brushed the roof and the scent of river water mingled with the fragrance of rice paper and warm oil. Sora was known for crafting lanterns of extraordinary beauty, delicate spheres that glowed with a gentle otherworldly light as if each one contained a piece of the moon. But what made Sora's lanterns truly remarkable was not their appearance, but the effect they had on those who carried them. It was said that anyone who walked at night with one of his lanterns would find their path illuminated, not only in the world outside, but also within their own hearts. Old sorrows would soften, restless thoughts would quiet, and a sense of calm would settle over even the most troubled soul. Few knew the secret behind Sora's lanterns, and none had ever seen him at work. He kept odd hours, often rising long before dawn, or staying awake deep into the night, the faint glow of his workshop window the only sign of life in the sleeping village. Children whispered that he spoke to the lanterns as he made them, telling them stories and secrets, and that the lanterns listened, absorbing his words and weaving them into their light. One autumn evening, as the first chill of the season crept into the air, a young woman named Hana arrived at Sora's door. Her eyes were shadowed with worry, and her hands trembled as she held out a small coin purse. "Master Sora," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I have heard your lanterns can help those who cannot find peace. My sleep is troubled, my heart is heavy. I would like to buy a lantern, if I may." Sora studied her for a long moment, his gaze gentle but penetrating. "A lantern may light your way," he said, "but it cannot carry your burdens for you. Still, if you are willing to walk with it, perhaps you will find what you seek." He disappeared into the back of his workshop, the sound of his footsteps muffled by tatami mats. When he returned, he carried a lantern unlike any Hana had ever seen. Its paper was the color of dawn, and its frame was so thin and delicate it seemed woven from sunlight itself. He handed it to her with both hands, bowing his head in respect. "Walk with this lantern. Tonight," he instructed, "but do not speak. Listen to the night and let the lantern's light show you what needs to be seen." Hana thanked him and left the lantern's glow warming her hands as she walked through the darkening village. She followed the path along the river, past fields where the wind whispered through the rice stalks, and into a grove of ancient cedars. The world was silent, except for the soft crunch of her footsteps and the gentle hum of the lantern. As she walked, memories rose up within her, old fears, regrets, and moments of joy she thought she had forgotten. The lantern's light seemed to draw them out, illuminating each memory with a gentle clarity. She saw herself as a child, laughing beneath the summer sun. She saw the moment she had parted from a dear friend, words left unsaid lingering in the air. She saw the worry that had settled in her heart when her father fell ill, the helplessness she felt, and the silent prayers she had whispered into the darkness. With each step, the heaviness in her chest began to lift. The lantern's glow did not banish her sorrow, but it softened it, transforming it into something she could hold with tenderness rather than fear. She realized that she had been carrying not only her own pain, but also the pain of those she loved, as if by holding it all inside she could somehow protect them from suffering. When she returned to the village, the first light of dawn was touching the rooftops. Hana bowed deeply to the lantern, then returned to Sora's workshop to thank him. The old lantern maker was waiting for her as if he had known she would come. "Did you find what you were seeking?" he asked. Hana nodded, tears shining in her eyes. "I found that I do not need to be free of sorrow to be at peace. I can hold my pain gently, and in doing so, I can sleep again." Sora smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "The light of the lantern is the light of your own awareness," he said softly. "When you shine it upon your suffering, you see that it too is part of the great tapestry of life. Nothing needs to be pushed away. Everything belongs. Word of Hana's experience spread quietly through the village, and others began to visit Sora, each seeking a lantern of their own. Some came with grief, others with anxiety or loneliness, but all found that the gentle light helped them see their burdens in a new way. The lanterns did not erase their troubles, but they illuminated the path through them, revealing the beauty that could be found even in the darkest moments. Years passed, and Sora grew older, his hair turning silver, and his hands growing thin and knotted. One winter, as snow began to fall, he called Hana to his workshop. "It is time for me to rest," he told her, "but the light must continue. Will you learn the lantern maker's secret?" Hana agreed, and Sora began to teach her the art of crafting lanterns, not just the techniques of shaping bamboo and paper, but the deeper practice of listening, of infusing each lantern with the stories and hopes of those who would carry it. He taught her that the true light came not from the flame, but from the compassion and attention woven into every step of the process. When Sora finally passed away, the village mourned his loss, but the light of his lanterns continued to shine. Hana became the new lantern maker, her workshop a place of quiet refuge for all who sought peace. And each night, as the villagers walked home with lanterns glowing in their hands, they carried with them the gentle reminder that peace is not the absence of sorrow, but the willingness to meet every part of life with an open heart. In the heart of a mountain, cloaked in silent pine and swirling mist, there was a monastery with no doors. Travelers who found their way there often wondered how such a place could exist, and yet the monks who lived within its walls seemed to move freely between the inner and outer worlds, as if the boundary between inside and outside were only an illusion. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the peaks and the sky turned to indigo, a wandering musician named Riku arrived at the foot of the mountain. He had journeyed far, carrying only a battered flute and a heart full of longing. For years, Riku had played his music in villages and towns, seeking applause and coins. But lately, every note he played seemed empty, echoing only his own restlessness. As dusk settled, Riku followed a narrow path that wound upward through ancient trees. The air grew colder, and the hush of the forest pressed in around him. Just as he began to wonder if he had lost his way, he saw a soft glow ahead. The path opened onto a clearing, and there, in the gentle light of paper lanterns, stood the monastery with its open walls. Monks in simple robes moved quietly, their faces serene, their movements unhurried. Riku hesitated at the threshold, uncertain if he was welcome. But an old monk with kind eyes beckoned him forward. "You have traveled far," the monk said, "and your music has brought you here. Rest and listen." Riku entered and sat among the monks as they gathered for evening meditation. The silence in the hall was deep and alive, filled with the quiet breathing of many hearts. Riku closed his eyes and listened, expecting to hear the usual clamor of his thoughts. But instead, he heard something else, a subtle music, softer than the wind in pine needles, rising and falling with the rhythm of each breath. When the meditation ended, the old monk approached him again. "You are a musician," he said. "What do you hear in this silence?" Riku was surprised by the question. "I hear a kind of music, but not from any instrument I know. It is everywhere and nowhere, as if the silence itself is singing." The monk smiled. "This is the music of the present moment. Most people rush through life always seeking the next note, the next applause. They forget that the deepest music is found not in the sound, but in the space between the notes." That night, Riku slept in the open hall, the mountain air cool against his skin. He dreamed of a river flowing through a forest, its waters carrying both melody and silence. In his dream, he saw himself standing at the river's edge, his flute in hand, but when he tried to play, no sound came out. Instead, the river itself began to sing a song so beautiful and clear that it brought tears to his eyes. When he awoke, dawn was breaking. The monks were already at work, sweeping the courtyard and tending to the gardens. Riku wandered outside, his flute hanging at his side. He felt a strange peace, as if the silence of the monastery had seeped into his bones. He sat beneath a pine tree and lifted his flute to his lips. This time, instead of trying to impress or entertain, he simply let his breath flow naturally, allowing the music to arise and dissolve like mist. The notes were simple, unadorned, and yet they seemed to carry the entire mountain within them. A group of monks gathered nearby, listening with closed eyes. When Riku finished, the old monk approached once more. "You have found the true music," he said. "When you play from emptiness, the world listens. When you let go of the need to be heard, every note becomes a prayer." Riku remained at the monastery for many weeks, learning to listen more deeply, not only to music but to the silence that gives music its meaning. He discovered that every sound, every breath, every heartbeat was part of a greater symphony, and that the most profound peace came not from filling the silence but from honoring it. Eventually, Riku knew it was time to continue his journey. He thanked the monks and descended the mountain, his flute now a companion rather than a tool for seeking approval. As he traveled from village to village, he played not to impress but to share the quiet joy he had found. Those who heard his music felt something shift within them, a stillness, a gentle awakening, as if they too had visited the monastery with no doors. And so the music of the mountain spread, carried on the wind, reminding all who heard it that the deepest peace is found not in the noise of the world, but in the silent space that holds it all. High in the northern mountains, where the snow falls even in summer, and the wind carries secrets from distant lands, there was a village that did not appear on any map. The people who lived there were few and quiet, tending their terraced fields and listening to the language of the wind. In this village, every child was taught from an early age to respect the silence between words, for it was said that the silence was where wisdom lived. In the center of the village stood a house unlike any other. Its walls were made of stone so old they seemed to hum with memory, and its roof was thatched with reeds gathered from the hidden lake beyond the ridge. This house belonged to an old woman named Amaya, who was neither a healer nor a priestess. Yet, people came to her from far and wide, seeking answers to questions they could not speak aloud. Amaya was known for her garden, which bloomed with flowers no one else could grow. Some said she sang to the seeds. At midnight, others whispered that she listened to the dreams of the earth, but the truth was simpler. Amaya understood that every living thing carried its own story, and she had learned how to listen with her whole being. One winter, when the snow lay deep and the moon hung low over the mountains, a stranger arrived in the village. He was wrapped in a cloak of midnight blue, his face hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat, and he carried a satchel filled with mysterious objects, bells that made no sound, stones that glowed faintly in the dark, and scrolls written in a script no one could read. The villagers watched him with curiosity and caution, for strangers were rare in these parts. The children dared each other to follow him as he made his way to Amaya's house, but none were brave enough to cross the threshold. Only the wind, ever bold, slipped through the cracks in the walls and listened as the stranger knocked softly on the door. Amaya opened the door without a word, as if she had been expecting him. The stranger bowed deeply and stepped inside, removing his hat to reveal eyes the color of storm clouds and hair streaked with silver. He sat across from Amaya at her low wooden table, and for a long time neither spoke. The only sound was the crackle of the fire and the distant howl of the wind. At last, the stranger reached into his satchel and produced a small, intricately carved box. He placed it on the table between them and slid it toward Amaya. She regarded it with calm curiosity, her hands resting lightly in her lap. "This box," the stranger said, his voice as soft as falling snow, "contains a question I have carried for many years. I have traveled across deserts and oceans, through cities and forests, seeking someone who can answer it. I have been told that you are such a person." Amaya smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "Sometimes the answer is not as important as the willingness to listen to the question," she replied. "May I open it?" The stranger nodded, and Amaya lifted the lid. Inside was a single feather, white as the snow outside, and a slip of paper on which was written a single character, Wu Mu, the Zen symbol for emptiness or nothingness. Amaya studied the feather and the paper, then looked up at the stranger. "You seek to understand the nature of emptiness," she said. "But what is it you truly wish to know?" The stranger hesitated, searching for words. "All my life, I have sought meaning in books, in teachers, in the world itself. But the more I seek, the less I seem to find. I have heard that to understand emptiness is to find peace, yet the concept eludes me. Is emptiness the absence of all things, or is it the presence of something beyond words?" Amaya closed the box and placed it gently back on the table. She rose and motioned for the stranger to follow her into the garden, where the snow lay untouched except for the delicate prints of birds. "Emptiness is not a void to be feared," she said, as they walked among the sleeping flowers. "It is the space in which all things arise and dissolve. Look at the snow, it covers the earth, softening every edge, quieting every sound. Yet, beneath it, life is waiting. Seeds are dreaming, roots are reaching. The snow is not the absence of life, but the promise of its return." They paused beside a willow tree, its branches bowed beneath the weight of snow. Amaya brushed a branch with her hand, sending a flurry of snowflakes to the ground. When you let go of the need to fill every moment with thought, you discover the vastness of your own awareness. In that space, peace arises naturally, like spring from winter. The stranger listened, his heart quieting for the first time in many years. He realized that his endless search for meaning had been like running in circles, always missing the stillness at the center. They returned to the house, and Amaya prepared tea, her movements slow and deliberate. She poured the tea into 2 cups and set them on the table. "Drink," she said. "Let the warmth fill you, and notice the space between each sip." As the stranger drank, he felt the tension in his body begin to melt. The silence between their words became as comforting as the tea itself. He understood in a way that needed no explanation that emptiness was not something to be grasped, but something to be experienced, a gentle spaciousness that held all things without clinging. He stayed in the village for many weeks, helping Amaya in her garden, learning to listen to the stories of the wind and the silence of the snow. Each day he felt his heart grow lighter, his mind clearer. When spring finally arrived and the first flowers bloomed, he knew it was time to continue his journey. Before he left, Amaya handed him the box with the feather and the slip of paper. "Keep this as a reminder," she said. Whenever you feel lost, open the box and remember the snow, the silence, and the space that holds all things." The stranger bowed deeply, gratitude shining in his eyes. He walked out of the village and into the mountains, carrying with him not an answer, but a deep and abiding peace. As the years passed, the villagers spoke often of the stranger who had come seeking the meaning of emptiness. Some said he became a great teacher, others claimed he disappeared into the wilderness, but all agreed that the village itself seemed quieter, more spacious after his visit. And in Amaya's garden, the flowers continued to bloom in impossible colors, their petals opening each spring to the silent wisdom of the snow that had covered them all winter long. Far beyond the last village, where the land rose in silent forested waves and the sky pressed close with ancient stars, there was a lake that mirrored the heavens so perfectly it was called the sky's reflection. No roads led to its shores, and only those who wandered without seeking ever found their way there. The lake was said to be bottomless, its surface so still that even the wind hesitated before crossing it. Elders whispered that the lake was a portal not to another world, but to the deepest chambers of the heart. On a night when the moon was new and the air was thick with the scent of pine and moss, a young woman named Lynn arrived at the water's edge. She had traveled for many days, guided by a longing she could not name. Her life in the distant city had been full of noise and motion, endless tasks, bright lights, and the constant hum of expectation. Yet, beneath it all, she felt a quiet ache, a sense that something essential was missing, like a melody she could almost remember, but never quite sing. Lynn sat on a smooth stone at the lake's edge, her breath clouding in the cool night air. The silence was vast, so complete it seemed to press gently on her skin. She closed her eyes and listened not for any sound, but for the silence itself. In that silence, she felt her thoughts begin to slow, her worries dissolving like mist in sunlight. As she opened her eyes, she saw a ripple move across the lake's surface, though no wind stirred. From the darkness, a small boat appeared, carved from a single piece of wood so old it seemed to glow with its own inner light. At the prow sat an old man, his hair white as starlight, his eyes deep and calm. He gestured for Lynn to join him, and though she felt no fear, only a gentle curiosity, she stepped into the boat and sat opposite him. They drifted in silence, the boat gliding effortlessly across the water. The old man did not speak, but his presence was comforting, like the embrace of a beloved memory. Lynn watched the stars reflected in the lake, each one a point of light in the infinite darkness. She felt as if she were floating not on water, but in the sky itself. After a time that could have been minutes or centuries, the boat came to rest in the center of the lake. The old man reached into his robe and drew out a small, polished mirror. He held it out to Lynn, who took it in her hands. As she gazed into the mirror, she expected to see her own face, but instead she saw images from her life, moments of joy, sorrow, love, and loss. She saw herself as a child, laughing in her mother's arms, as a student striving to please her teachers, as a friend comforting those she loved, as a stranger passing unnoticed through crowded streets. Each image shimmered and shifted, dissolving into the next. Lynn felt her heart ache with the beauty and sadness of it all. She realized that she had spent so much of her life searching for meaning outside herself, trying to become someone worthy of love and belonging. Yet in this mirror, she saw that every moment, every smile, every tear, every silent longing was already complete, already enough. The old man's voice soft as the breeze broke the silence. "What do you see?" Lynn hesitated, searching for words. "I see my life, not as I wished it to be, but as it truly is. I see that I have always been searching for something that was never lost." The old man nodded, his eyes reflecting the starlight. "The lake shows us what we carry within. Most come seeking answers, but find only themselves. The peace you seek is not in the world, but in the seeing itself. When you look without judgment, you discover that nothing is missing." Lynn closed her eyes, letting the truth of his words settle in her heart. She felt a wave of relief, as if a great weight had been lifted. For the first time, she understood that she did not need to change to become better or different. She needed only to be present to see herself and her life with gentle clarity. When she opened her eyes, the boat was drifting back to shore. The old man smiled, his presence fading like mist in the morning sun. Lynn stepped onto the shore, the mirror still warm in her hand. She turned to thank him, but the boat and its mysterious guide were gone, leaving only the silent lake perfectly still. Lynn sat by the water until dawn, watching the sky turn from indigo to gold. She felt no urge to hurry, no need to return to the world she had left behind. She knew that when she did return, she would carry the lake's stillness within her, a quiet center that no storm could disturb. As the first birds began to sing, Lynn rose and walked along the shore, her steps light and unhurried. She noticed the delicate patterns of frost on the grass, the way the sunlight danced on the water, the gentle rhythm of her own breath. Everything seemed new, alive with presence. In the days and weeks that followed, Lynn made her way back to the city. She resumed her work, her relationships, her daily routines. But something had changed. She no longer rushed from one task to the next, no longer measured her worth by the approval of others. She moved through the world with a quiet confidence, her heart anchored in the stillness she had found at the lake. People around her noticed the change. Friends and colleagues remarked on her calm, her ability to listen deeply, her gentle smile. Some asked her for advice, seeking the secret to her serenity. Lynn would only smile and say, "Sometimes you must journey to the place where the sky meets the earth and listen to the silence that lives there." At night, when the city grew quiet, Lynn would take out the mirror and gaze into its depths. She saw not only her own reflection, but the reflections of all those she had met, all those she had loved and lost. She understood that each life was a reflection of the great mystery, each heart a drop in the boundless ocean of being. And so the lake continued to mirror the sky, and those who found their way to its shores discovered not another world, but the vastness within their own hearts. The old man in the boat remained a mystery, a silent guide for those ready to see. And Lynn, like so many before her, became both seeker and found, carrying the peace of the lake wherever she went, a living reflection of the sky's endless embrace. In a city where the river curved like a sleeping dragon and the lanterns glowed each night with the promise of small joys, there was a bridge known to only a few. It was not the grand stone span that carried carts and crowds, nor the rickety footbridge of the market, but a narrow wooden crossing hidden by willow branches and the hush of old stories. Some called it the Bridge of Returning, though no one could say exactly what one returned to by crossing it. On a rain-softened evening, as mist curled from the water and the city's noise faded into the hush of falling drops, a scholar named Min found herself drawn to this bridge. Min was known for her clever mind and restless spirit, always searching for answers in books, debates, and the endless scroll of written words. Yet lately her nights had grown troubled, and her days heavy, as if the questions she had once loved were now stones in her pocket. She paused at the entrance to the bridge, uncertain why her feet had brought her here. The willows swayed their leaves, brushing her shoulders, and the river below whispered secrets she could not quite hear. Min stepped onto the planks, the wood creaking softly beneath her weight, and began to cross. Halfway across, she met a figure standing in the shadows, a woman wrapped in a cloak the color of twilight. The woman's face was gentle, her eyes bright with the kind of kindness that comes from long listening. She greeted Min with a bow and a question. "What brings you to the Bridge of Returning on such a night?" Min hesitated. "I don't know," she admitted. "I thought I was searching for peace, or perhaps for an answer to a question I can't quite name." The woman nodded, her gaze steady. "Most who come here are searching for something they cannot name. Shall we walk together?" They continued across the bridge, the rain falling in a steady rhythm. As they walked, Min found herself speaking of her life, her studies, her achievements, the pride and pressure of being known as the city's brightest mind. She spoke of the loneliness that sometimes crept in, the fear that her life was all surface and no depth, the longing for a rest she could not find. The woman listened without interruption, her presence warm and attentive. When Min finished, the woman asked, "What is it you truly wish for beneath all your questions?" Min was silent for a long moment, listening to the rain. At last she said, "I wish to feel at home in my own heart. I wish to rest, if only for a little while, from the need to prove or achieve." The woman smiled. "You have crossed many bridges in your life, always seeking the next shore. But sometimes the journey is not forward but inward. Sometimes the greatest homecoming is to return to yourself." They reached the far side of the bridge where the city's lights shimmered on the water. The woman turned to Min and placed a small stone in her hand. "This is not a magic stone," she said, "but a reminder. When your mind grows restless, hold it, and remember this night the sound of the rain, the kindness of a stranger, the peace that comes when you allow yourself simply to be." Min closed her fingers around the stone, feeling its cool weight. She realized that her heart felt lighter, her mind quieter. She bowed in gratitude, and as she did, the woman's form seemed to dissolve into the mist, leaving Min alone on the quiet bank. She walked home slowly, the stone warm in her palm, the rain washing away the last traces of her old restlessness. That night, Min slept deeply, her dreams filled with the gentle sound of water and the memory of the bridge. In the days that followed, Min kept the stone on her desk, a silent companion as she worked and studied. Whenever her thoughts grew tangled or her heart heavy, she would close her eyes and remember the bridge, the rain, and the kindness that had met her there. She learned to pause, to listen, to rest in the space between questions and answers. Over time, Min became known not just for her intelligence, but for her calm presence and her ability to help others find peace in their own hearts. She understood now the wisdom was not only in knowing, but in being present, being gentle, being at home in the world as it is. And so the bridge of returning remained hidden by willows and the hush of rain, waiting for those who needed to remember what it means to come home to themselves, to cross not into another world, but into the quiet, welcoming depths of their own hearts. In a valley where the wind carried the scent of wild plum blossoms and the river sang its ancient song, there was a small temple built from the stones of the mountain itself. The temple was simple, a single hall, a bell that chimed at dawn and dusk, and a garden where moss and sunlight shared the earth. People from nearby villages would sometimes visit to offer incense or seek a blessing. But most days the temple was silent except for the laughter of sparrows and the whisper of bamboo. The temple's caretaker was an old monk named Daichi, whose days passed in quiet rhythm, sweeping the paths, tending the garden, brewing tea, and sitting in meditation as the shadows shifted across the floor. Daichi was not famous for wisdom or miracles, but those who spent time with him often left with a sense of lightness, as if a burden they had forgotten they were carrying had been gently set down. One spring morning, just as the mist was lifting from the valley, a young man named Haru arrived at the temple gate. Haru's face was drawn with worry, and his eyes darted restlessly from stone to sky. He bowed to Daichi and asked if he might stay for a while, for his heart was troubled and his sleep had grown thin. Daichi welcomed him with a nod and a cup of green tea. They sat together in the garden, watching the steam rise and curl in the cool air. Haru spoke of his troubles of a life filled with striving, of disappointments and regrets, of a mind that would not be still no matter how hard he tried. He confessed that he had come to the temple hoping to find a secret teaching, some key to unlock the peace he had heard about in stories. Daichi listened, his gaze soft and steady. When Haru finished, Daichi set his empty cup on the stone and asked, "Would you help me with the garden?" Haru agreed, and together they began to weed the moss, trim the bamboo, and sweep the fallen petals from the path. The work was simple, the tools worn smooth by years of use. At first, Haru's mind wandered, replaying old conversations and worrying about the future. But as the hours passed, he found himself drawn into the rhythm of the work. The feel of the earth in his hands, the sound of the broom on stone, the way the sunlight warmed his back. When they paused to rest, Daichi poured more tea and said, "When you tend the garden, do you think about the weeds you pulled yesterday or the ones you may find tomorrow?" Haru shook his head. "No, I just see what is in front of me." Daichi smiled. "This is the heart of practice. Peace is not something you find by searching far and wide. It is found in the simple act of being present, of meeting each moment as it comes." That evening, as the bell chimed and the valley filled with the soft light of dusk, Haru sat with Daichi on the temple steps. The air was cool and fragrant with plum blossoms, and for the first time in many months, Haru felt his thoughts grow quiet. He noticed the way the sky deepened from blue to violet, the way the first stars appeared, the gentle hush that settled over the world. He turned to Daichi and asked, "Is it really so simple, just to be here now?" Daichi nodded. The mind loves to complicate things, to chase after peace as if it were a prize to be won. But peace is always here, waiting in the space between thoughts, in the breath, in the quiet beauty of the world. Our task is not to create peace, but to remember it. Haru stayed at the temple for several days, helping with the garden, sharing meals, and sitting in silence. Each day, he felt a little lighter, a little more at home in his own skin. He realized that his suffering had come not from the world itself, but from his resistance to it, his constant striving, his refusal to rest in the present. Before he left, Daichi gave him a small stone from the garden, smooth and cool. "Carry this with you," he said, "and when your mind grows restless, hold it and remember the garden. Remember that peace is not far away, but as close as your own breath." Haru bowed deeply and made his way down the mountain, the stone warm in his hand. He returned to his life in the village, but everything seemed changed. The colors brighter, the air sweeter, the world more welcoming. When troubles arose, as they always do, he would pause, breathe, and remember the temple, the garden, and the gentle wisdom of an old monk who had shown him that peace is not a secret to be discovered, but a home to which we can always return. And in the valley, the temple bell continued to ring at dawn and dusk, calling all who could hear back to the simple, silent heart of the present moment. In the mountains, where clouds drifted low and the air tasted of pine and stone, there was a path known only to those who had lost their way. It was called the Pilgrim's Path, though few who walked it considered themselves pilgrims. Some found it after a great sorrow, others after a moment of sudden joy. All who walked it did so with hearts open, whether from longing or wonder, or simply the quiet ache that comes from being human. One autumn evening, as the sky burned gold and the wind carried the scent of fallen leaves, an old woman named Setsuko set out along this path. Her hair was silver, her step slow but steady, and her eyes shone with the gentle humor of one who has seen many seasons come and go. She carried no pack, only a simple walking stick and a small pouch of rice. Setsuko had lived a long life in the village below, raising children, tending a garden, and watching the world change and change again. Now, with her children grown and her days quiet, she felt a stirring in her heart, a call to walk, to listen, to see what waited beyond the familiar hills. The path wound through forests where sunlight fell in golden pools, and the hush was deep and kind. Setsuko listened to the crunch of leaves beneath her feet, the distant call of a hawk, the soft murmur of her own breath. She remembered stories her grandmother had told her of monks who wandered the mountains seeking enlightenment, of spirits who appeared to travelers on lonely roads. She smiled, wondering if she might meet such a spirit herself. As dusk gathered, Setsuko came upon a clearing where a great stone sat in the center, worn smooth by time and weather. She sat down and opened her pouch of rice, eating slowly, savoring each grain. The world around her grew quiet, the air cooling as the first stars appeared. She felt a deep peace settle in her chest, as if the earth itself were breathing with her. After some time, she heard footsteps on the path. A young man appeared, his face shadowed by worry, his clothes dusty from travel. He paused at the edge of the clearing, uncertain, until Setsuko smiled and gestured for him to join her. They sat together in silence, sharing the last of the rice. The young man's name was Jun, and as the night deepened, he spoke of his journey of leaving home in search of purpose, of feeling lost and unsure, of longing for something he could not name. Setsuko listened to her presence, gentle and unhurried. When he finished, she said, "Sometimes, when we are lost, we are closer to home than we realize. The path is not always straight, and the heart does not always know its own wisdom until it has wandered." June nodded, his shoulders relaxing. "I thought I needed to find answers, but now, sitting here, I feel as if the questions themselves are enough." Setsuko smiled. "The questions are the path. When we walk with them rather than against them, we find ourselves carried by something greater than our own will." They watched as the moon rose, silvering the clearing and turning the stone to a pool of light. June asked, "Do you ever wish you could go back and change your life?" Setsuko shook her head. "Every joy and sorrow, every mistake and kindness brought me here. To wish for another path is to wish away the gift of this moment." As the night wore on, more travelers arrived, an old friend from Setsuko's childhood, a woman who had lost her husband, a boy with a flute who played a melody so sweet it seemed to mend the air itself. Each brought their own story, their own questions, and together they made a small circle around the stone, sharing food, laughter, and silence. In the quiet hours before dawn, Setsuko closed her eyes and listened to the gentle breathing of her companions, the rustle of leaves, the distant song of an owl. She felt her heart expand, holding not only her own life, but the lives of all those gathered there and all those who had ever walked the pilgrim's path. When the first light touched the sky, the travelers rose, each setting out in a different direction. Setsuko stood for a long moment, watching the sun rise over the mountains, her heart full and at peace. She knew she would return to her village, to her garden and her quiet days. But she also knew that the path would always be there, winding through the mountains, waiting for any who needed to walk, to listen to remember that every journey is sacred and every step, whether lost or found, is a step toward home. And so the pilgrim's path remained a thread of quiet wonder woven through the world, guiding all who walked it back to the heart of themselves, where peace waits like a stone in moonlight, silent and enduring, ready to welcome every traveler home.